All right, so today we're diving into a really cool molecular mystery. It's a tale of two plastics, polystyrene and PMMA. Now, on the surface, these two can look and feel pretty much identical. They're both clear, glassy, you see them everywhere. But the moment you put them under a little bit of stress, one just snaps in an instant, while the other one actually puts up a fight. So what's the deal?
So let's get right into it. Think about one of those old, brittle CD jewel cases. That's polystyrene. You know the ones. You drop it once, and bam, it just cracks, right? Now picture a modern car's taillight. That's usually made of PMMA. It can take a decent knock and be totally fine. So yeah, the big question is, why does one of these materials just give up so easily while its lookalike is just so much tougher?
Okay, so here are our two main characters for this story. On the left, you've got polystyrene, or PS for short, and on the right, PMMA, which you probably know as acrylic or even plexiglass. Now, they're both what we call transparent amorphous polymers, and all that means is that their long molecular chains are all jumbled up randomly, kind of like a big bowl of spaghetti. But as we already know, the way they react to force is just worlds apart. One is super brittle, the other is famous for being tough.
The secret to this huge difference isn't something you can just see by looking at them. Nope. To really solve this mystery, we've got to zoom in. I mean way in, all the way down to the level of individual molecules and see how these things are actually built. The answer is hiding in their molecular architecture. And that brings us to what I like to call the molecular dance. We're going to take a close look at the long chains that make up these plastics, and this is the really important part, what's hanging off of those chains. Turns out it's these tiny, tiny details that control literally everything that happens next. Okay, the single most important idea to get your head around here is something called a side group. The best way to think about it is this. Imagine the main polymer chain is a person walking down the street. The side group, that's the backpack they're wearing. If you have a small, light backpack, you can move around easily, right? But what if you're wearing a huge, bulky, super rigid backpack? Yeah, not so much. This simple idea, it's the key to this whole thing.
So let's check out polystyrene's backpack. It's a thing called a phenyl ring, and trust me, it is the definition of bulky. It's big, it's flat, and it's totally rigid. Having one of these stuck to the polymer chain is like trying to get around while wearing a giant locked suitcase on your back. It massively restricts how the chain can twist or turn or wiggle at all. It basically locks it in place.
Okay, so what about PMMA? Well, its side group is called an ester group. Now, it's not tiny, but it's definitely smaller and way less rigid than that bulky phenyl ring on polystyrene. It's kind of like swapping that giant suitcase for a much more manageable day pack. This gives the polymer chain just that little bit more freedom to rotate and move around. And this seemingly small difference, that's our first huge clue.
Now, this freedom of movement, it has a proper scientific name. It's called segmental mobility. And honestly, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's just the ability of little segments of that long polymer chain to wiggle and rearrange themselves. So polystyrene, with its giant bulky backpack, has really low segmental mobility. But PMMA, with its smaller pack, has a bit more what we'd call moderate mobility.
All right, there's just one more piece to this molecular puzzle we need to talk about. It's called entanglement density. And again, the best analogy is that bowl of cooked spaghetti. The long strands get all tangled up with each other, right? Well, in polymers, these physical tangles act like knots, and they're what really hold the material together. The more rigid and straight a polymer chain is, like in polystyrene, the less it can get tangled up. But the slightly more flexible chains of PMMA, they can tangle up quite a bit more.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got the side groups, which control mobility, and we've got the entanglements. That's the molecular setup. So now for the big question. What happens when we actually apply stress? When you pull on one of these plastics, it has two main ways it can respond at the macroscopic level. It can either form something called a craze, or it can shear. And here are those two possible fates. On the left, you've got crazing. Let me tell you, this is the bad one. Crazing is when tiny little voids, like microscopic bubbles, open up in the material and they're connected by these stretched out strands of polymer. Think of it like a zipper that's splitting open. Once it starts, it just goes and it leads straight to a crack. But on the right, you have shear yielding. This is the tougher, better option. Instead of opening up voids, the polymer chains just slide past one another, absorbing a ton of energy, kind of like stretching taffy. It's a controlled way to deform, not just a complete failure. So here's the absolute crucial point. Crazing and shear yielding are basically in a competition with each other, and some really groundbreaking research from Donald and Kramer way back in 1982 showed that shear yielding can actually act like a brake on crazing. This is so cool. If a material can manage to start shear yielding right at the very tip of a growing craze, it can literally blunt it, stop it dead in its tracks, and prevent a catastrophic crack from ever forming.
Okay, now we have all the clues on the table. We know the molecular structure, and we know the two different ways it can fail. It's time to put it all together and deliver the final verdict on why polystyrene is just so darn brittle.
So here it is, the step-by-step path to failure for polystyrene. It all starts with that big, bulky phenyl side group. That leads directly to severely restricted mobility, meaning those chains just can't wiggle. That in turn means it has a low entanglement density. So when you pull on it, it really only has one choice: form those unstable crazes. And here's the kicker. Because it has no mobility, it can't hit the brakes with shear yielding. There's nothing to stop them. The crazes just grow and grow, completely unchecked, and snap. Catastrophic fracture. It's almost inevitable.
But PMMA? It gets to take a totally different path. Its smaller ester group gives it just enough mobility. And that mobility, that is the absolute key. It's what allows PMMA to trigger some of that tougher shear yielding when it's put under stress. So that shear deformation goes to work, blunting the tips of any crazes that try to form, stopping them from growing out of control. And the result? PMMA can bend, it can stretch, and it can absorb a whole lot more energy before it even thinks about failing.
And hey, let's put a number on this just to see how dramatic it is. Polystyrene can typically only stretch about, 3 to 4% of its original length before it just shatters. I mean, that's practically no stretching at all. It really is the textbook definition of brittle.
And this simple chart just makes the difference crystal clear, doesn't it? You see PS breaking at around 3.5%, but look at PMMA. It can often stretch to 7.5%, sometimes even more. That means it can deform more than twice as much before it fails. That's a direct measurement of how much tougher it really is.
So, after this whole deep dive into the molecular world, what's the big picture takeaway? What's the simple rule we can walk away with that explains all this?
Well, this table basically puts it all together, like the final evidence board in a detective story. From the side group, to the mobility, to the entanglement, all the way to the final deformation mode, you can see how every single property pushes polystyrene toward being brittle, and how those same properties give PMMA all the tools it needs to be tougher. It's a complete, satisfying story, right from the molecule all the way up to the material we can hold.
And here it is, the one thing to remember from all of this, the core principle. It's a simple, direct chain of cause and effect. The molecular structure dictates the chain mobility, which then determines the available deformation mechanisms, and that ultimately defines the material's toughness. Structure leads to mobility, leads to deformation, leads to toughness. That's it.
And that leaves us with a really powerful final thought. Understanding this principle isn't just about explaining a couple of old plastics. It's actually the key to creating entirely new ones. Think about it. By carefully choosing the backpacks we attach to these polymer chains, what if we could precisely design how anything breaks, or even better, how it doesn't break at all? The possibilities there are just absolutely fascinating to think about.